Good evening, everyone. I'm Pete Meyer, technical editor from Motor Age Magazine. As always, here with my good friend, Mr. Jerry Trulia.
Thanks, Pete. Always a pleasure working with you, and always a pleasure working with everyone out there. And we want to thank our sponsor, Pico. That way you guys can see this thing and review it.
Yep. I'm really kind of proud of tonight's event, too. We got a lot of people who signed up. So,
from all over the world.
Yeah, from all over the world who have signed up for tonight's webcast. So again, that wouldn't happen without Pico's help.
Right.
So we appreciate that. And it's also not going to happen without the help of those folks in the background here, our regular TST supporter, volunteer,
non-paid people.
Of course, there's your lovely wife, Doreen, behind the camera.
Doreen, thank you so much, Doreen.
And we have Pierre Rispeau, Vice President, TST, manning the keyboard. He'll be able to answer a lot of your questions as we go along.
And then we have a couple of extra people that may be on tonight to answer specific questions, correct?
In fact, and we'll cover that in a moment, but hey, just go back to the beginning. Welcome to tonight, making money with your scope. Top 10 tests you can put to work.
Yeah.
Not today, maybe. Tomorrow.
And you know what? The practice makes perfect. We've done quite a few different scope ones over the years. But if you use your scope, you can make money with it.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of what gave birth to the idea for tonight's webcast. You know, talking about what our objective tonight is. You know, I know I, for one, when I started with the magazine close to 10 years ago now, I would go to presentations around the country, or I'd talk to techs around the country, and I'd always ask, when doing some type of scope presentation, how many guys in the room were using a scope. And back then, if I got one or two hands up, that was pretty good.
Right.
You know, it was. When I know the shop that I worked in before leaving the field full time, you know, I was it. I was the only guy who had one or even tried one. But now you're seeing that kind of reversed. I mean, a lot of guys and gals are seeing the value in that tool. And I mean, with all the accessories you can get from a modern scope, I can't think of any drivability parameter you can't check.
It's true.
You know, using that platform. So, and when we started talking about this and thinking about this, I also saw a lot of comments from techs who would come up to us at an event or in the various automotive Facebook groups that are out there. And one of the common things I saw was, you know, a lot of y'all are excited about this advanced testing techniques like the in-cylinder pressure testing. That's really big, you know, right now. Analyzing pressure and vacuum waveforms, even NVH, you know, with the scope. But a lot of guys are commenting that that's all well and good, but I'm really not that friendly with my scope yet.
Right. And you know, you brought up a very good point. Now, you know, here I run a shop as well. So we do pressure and cylinder pressure transducers for years. And how many times in a year do you really need to go into cylinder and do that?
Right.
Maybe more, it's a little more frequently than it was 5 years ago because of VVT and some valve issues there. But to be honest with you, it's really what we're talking about tonight, what you just said. It's really making money with your scope doing the basic test. Yeah. And that's how you get good at something and proficient, is by using it and trying it.
And that's another thing that came up too, you know, like a lot of guys could see the value in those more advanced tests, but let's be realistic. The accessories for those, to perform those tests, are not cheap.
That's true. That's another expense over the scope.
Right, and like you pointed out, you know, I might use that in-cylinder pressure test once a week, maybe. If I'm specializing in drivability, maybe more often. But right now, you know, my scope's sitting there collecting dust. I don't want to buy that kind of equipment for something I'm only going to need a few times a week.
Yeah.
So again, tonight we want to show you that you can use your scope for a lot more than that. You can use it every single day.
Correct.
On the cars, and that's going to help you. And again, we want to make sure we thank our sponsors, of course, the guys at Pico who stepped up to sponsor tonight's webcast, and
thank you.
Our friends at AES.
Oh yeah, George and Carlos.
Yeah.
Great people.
And
got good accessories.
And as you were saying earlier, alluded to earlier, we should have one or two Pico gurus standing by on the chat room. So if you do have a specific question about Pico, then we're going to let them handle that. Okay, that's not really the goal of what we're trying to do here tonight.
Right.
Of course, as you many already know, at the end of the webcast, we will be selecting at random one of you who registered for tonight's webinar to win this premium 6-way breakout test lead from Pico, thanks to the folks at Pico.
And it's a real nice set.
It is a real nice set.
Hooks up to the scope leads and hooks up to the components that you're testing on the end. So
the nice thing about this test kit is if you can use this to open up a connector, insert these leads in series, and then it's already built in for you to be able to attach the scope at the same token. So this avoids, minimizes any chance of damaging the system by back probing or piercing.
Correct.
So that's a big plus if you're able to do that. Again, some housekeeping. Again, I want to thanks to the folks who are here. You guys have to understand, it's like TST, these men and women are out here tonight because they want to be. Nobody's getting paid for tonight. We do this because we want to try to help all of y'all make a better living for yourselves. If after you eat tonight, if you can go back to work tomorrow and make a few extra bucks than you could have otherwise, then it was a success.
Exactly.
Right?
And we'd love to hear from you. Some of you do get in touch with us. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure that you look at that handout link that's right below the player that you're watching the webcast on. We took the time to put together, what I call like a toolbox reference for you. It's going to outline a lot of the tests that we're doing tonight. Give you some known good, known bad, tell you how to hook up the scope, what to set the scope to. So again, if you're watching and you're kind of new to scope use or you're not that comfortable with it, this will help you. Speed up that learning process a little bit. So make sure you download that and keep that in your box.
And in case you do miss it, email us and we'll get it to you.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
As G said, if you have a question or comment, use the chat function. It'll be monitored during the course of the webcast, and if there's something that Pierre or one of our experts online aren't able to help you with, they'll throw it up to us and we'll do our best to answer that question for you. If for some reason we can't, again, but don't let that stop you. As G said, reach out to us, contact us, email us. Neither one of us is hard to find. Look us up on Facebook, send us a message there with your question or your comment, and we'll do everything we can to help you. That's why we're here. And last, just a little housekeeping note. This is going to be, of course, recorded and posted back to the page where you are now so that you can look at it as many times as you want. But give me a few days. We're going to have several gigabytes of data to go through and process, and it does take some time. So give me a few days to get that up and running. Don't be upset with me if you go back tomorrow and you're not able to watch it.
Oh, come on. You can't work 24 plus hours?
All right. Here's really what we want to focus on tonight. We're going to talk about scope settings and the ones that apply to every single scope. So no matter which one you own, you'll be able to take this information and know what you have to set as far as the parameters go for you to capture a pattern. We're going to explain what the 20-20 rule is to capture a waveform. Then the bulk of tonight is going to be focusing on testing techniques that don't really require a lot of accessories, maybe an amp clamp.
Yeah,
but these are typically come with scope kits, so it's something you probably have either for your scope or maybe for your multimeter.
Right.
So you may have this in your box already. As we go along, we're also going to share some of the points on what to look for when you're looking at the pattern, because one of the things that G and I are very big proponents on is voltage drop, understanding what it is and how to use it to find electrical issues. And a lot of the things that we're doing with the scope tonight, we're setting up the scope to measure voltage drop pretty much.
Right.
But we're going to be able to see it over time, which is the true power of the scope. And we'll walk through that as we talk about these different tests.
No doubt.
And last but not least, we'll talk about the first two accessories that you probably already have, but if you don't, they'd be the first ones that I would add to my scope kit. What we're not going to cover, we're not going to get any advanced testing techniques. We're not going to talk about in-cylinder, pressure waveform, all of that stuff. We're not going to get into the features and benefits that the Pico itself may offer or compare to or anything like that. That's not the goal of tonight. As G alluded to earlier, so many times we see techs who struggle, or we teach a class that it's not even really advanced material, it's middle of the road maybe material, but we still see people in the audience who have that, for lack of a better way to describe it, that deer in the headlight look. Because the foundation is not strong, okay? Right. And it's okay, but understand that you got to shore that up first, and when you have that good and solid, then you can very easily incorporate some of those more advanced techniques and that more advanced knowledge. Let me just give you a good example, and this is the one quote I Googled that came up really good. Bruce Lee said, I don't fear the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times. Now think about that, fellas. If you're just hitting and missing with your scope, your scan tool, or anything else that you're using to try to fix the car, or you're waiting for somebody to break before you use it, you're the guy who's doing that 10,000 kicks once.
Right.
If you take the time to work at it, practice on it, repeat that process, and we're going to show you some ways to do that, well, then you're going to be that guy who's feared. You may only know that one kick, but boy,
the guy
you've
who's
got that down pat, right?
You bet. And you could get a little test board to practice at home.
Absolutely.
You know, sometimes you may have some spare time at night or on a weekend, early in the morning. You really need to practice because practice makes perfect. And don't just rely on, you know, auto setup. Auto setup can really mess you up once we get advanced going into more and more channels. Mm-hmm. But all of the stuff we're going to show you tonight is basic stuff that you need to practice on any lab scope that you have. Again, we'll be using a Pico, but it doesn't matter what scope.
Right, it's going to, you apply this to anything that you have. All right, so let's talk about the settings for every scope that you might own. The very first thing that you're going to have to make a decision on is how much time do you want to display on your scope screen. Now, again, these scopes have the ability to record data and deep record data and just, I mean, there's so many things that you can do with them. But if you're just starting out, I want it on one screen. I want it right there where I can see it. That's how I tend to look at it. So that's where I'm going to encourage you to start off with. Yes, you can build on the rest once you've got that down, but we want to first decide how much time do you want to display on the screen. And that's the power of the scope, because we are being able to trace that input, whatever it might be, over time and see it, just like we graph data PIDs on our scan tool.
And we should say some scopes do voltage or time per screen. Some do it per division. So one of the things I always teach in my lab scope classes is, let's take this injector. How much voltage goes to a fuel injector? It's not rocket science. The car's running. It's going to be somewhere from 12, maybe to 17 volts, right? Depending, and 17 volts will be regulated very quickly. But you know you got to be somewhere in that range to get a reading. Then it's going to have that inductive kick when you shut something off. How much time does a regular fuel injector stay on without going into GDI, just a regular injector, ported injector, sequential injection that we had around for years now? Maybe 3 milliseconds or so at idle, a hot idle. So you get that in your head, and you could figure if I had 10 divisions, well, maybe if I made 20 milliseconds per screen or 2 milliseconds per division, I would get myself a picture. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, don't get caught up with doing the auto again, because when you do auto, it may only be affecting one, and this particular scope has 4 channels. Yours may have 2 or 4 channels, or maybe 8, depending on the particular scope you're working on. So don't get into that. Get to know what voltage and time we're dealing with.
Right. And just to stress again what G pointed out to you, when you're looking at those settings on whatever scope model you own, when it comes to time, typically the 2 choices, you're either going to see per division,
right,
or what the total range or sweep, then they may say what sweep you want across that screen.
Correct.
Okay. The next one is the vertical axis. That's voltage. Of course, no matter what accessory you plug in, it's still a voltage input that the scope is reading.
Good point.
Right. So the current clamp is going to convert that to a voltage input. The pressure transducer is converting that to a voltage input. Many of these scopes, when you're using those type of, especially if they're made by the same company, there'll be a drop-down menu that helps take care of the scaling for you. But again, what we're focused on here is that what's the total range of voltage that we want to look for in the screen.
Right.
And as you just pointed out, that kind of leads me in to the 20/20 rule. Right. If you're working on something automotive, most everything automotive is going to be under 20 volts. Right?
Yeah.
Most everything. There are exceptions.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we're still working on a 12-volt system, so we're working on that. Now the other 20, let's talk about that. The 20-volt range, so that's where we're going to set the voltage to. And what you typically see is you'll probably see something more like plus or minus,
right,
20, so that there's that zero line that allows you to read negative numbers. So 20-volt range for that. The other 20, that's 20 milliseconds per division on the scope.
Coming across.
Okay. So if there's 10, let me try as a trick question, see if anybody's paying attention to what we're doing. If there's 10 divisions and it's 20 milliseconds per division,
How much is it per screen?
what's per screen? What's the sweep?
Someone out there should have that.
200 milliseconds.
All right.
Very good. 200 mils.
Very
Thank you.
good. 200 milliseconds. Okay, now here's a good one for you. Why do you think we're choosing 200 milliseconds? Why do we use that for the 2020 rule?
It's like Jeopardy. Tick, 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 tick. And we'd win all that money that dude won.
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
We had
okay.
2 point some million
Yeah,
dollars.
he killed, but not the record.
No, didn't make
He
the
just-
record.
Precision
came
and
short.
finding a pattern is the first answer.
Okay,
Constant pattern is the second answer.
all right. 200 milliseconds, and that's your trivia question for the night. 200 milliseconds is enough to just about take care of one full revolution, or what, I think 720 degrees
Yeah.
of an automotive engine at idle. So you just keep that in mind. If you're working on an engine idle, 200 milliseconds, you should be able to catch the full 4-stroke event.
Cycle. Yep.
So if you're hooked up to a camera crank sensor or a spark event or something like that, you'll cover that. All right? So that's our 2020 rule. That's if you want to get something on the screen, 2020 will get you something started. And that goes back to what you're saying about the little practice test board. This happens to be one from Snap-on that we used to make this. It's just a simple square wave pattern. But again, you can see that we got the 2020 just basis just to get something on the screen.
And we're at 0, and we're a 5-volt reference signal. We would view the top and the ground, and usually we're working on stuff. When it's grounded, that's when the component is coming on. Okay.
So now let's see what we have something to start on the screen. Now that's kind of small. So if we want to start manipulating the pattern so we get a nice clear picture, well, we can use voltage and time adjustments to do that. So let me share with you what that's going to do. On time, if we increase the amount of time on the screen, you can see how that pattern has become a blur. But what's nice feature about having that blur feature, I don't know if you can see that, there's a little teeny drop out there in the middle. And isn't this what the kind of thing you look for when you're graphing a PID? You're looking for that one little glitch or something that stands out. So here's again where the power of the scope comes in.
So I always say this is signature. Signature to the signal, it's going to ground, coming up, it's a nice square wave, nothing's breaking up. But many times you will not find the glitch on the vehicle, why it's cutting out. You need to increase the time, and Doreen, if you can just get in right on that, okay? That's really where the problem is. So I call it the picket fence, and when the picket fence has a little break in it, there we go, we
There's
got
your
the problem, okay? So hopefully you understand that. This is to look at the pattern, whether it be fuel injection, square wave pattern, cam crank, don't matter. Once you see the signature and it looks good, stop. Take the time, increase it, and let's see where the problem is. Okay.
And again, a lot of these scopes have some very good features that will help you capture these dropouts by using their drop-down menus and their adjustments.
Right.
But again, the key I want is, I don't care if you pick up that cute little and very, very capable one-channel
Yeah,
U scope,
Yep, that
all the way
works.
up to the big box, 8-channel ATS scope, or any of the Picos. No matter which one you happen to have in your hand, you can perform this on all of them.
And Snap-on did a good update. I know on our Zeus, they did an update recently that allows you for more time. The older software, if you haven't updated a scope, you may not be able to tighten it up, increase the time that much. But the newer stuff, it seems like they've done that. So
Very good.
I get to see a whole bunch of different scopes and classes.
Yeah.
They come, so it all works out. So here's some good information.
So again, you see, and of course, we all focus on the increase here, but the reverse is true as well. If you decrease the time, you can see how it's starting to spread that pattern out. So
Right.
that's the effect there.
Well, you know, the other thing is when you're getting a little old and blind like us, if you want to make it bigger, right, you're going to decrease the time. So if I keep decreasing this, I may only have one square wave. And if I increase it, we make it smaller. We could do the same with voltage, couldn't we? And if we want to see that bigger, it may be this big now, almost taking your whole screen.
Well, that goes back to what you were saying about the injectors, right? We all know that they don't take, if I have 200 milliseconds on the screen, I'll see
Right.
all 4, 6, or 8, or however many are on the
Correct.
engine. So by adjusting the time like we're doing here, we'd be narrowing down to the one we want to take a look at, right?
Correct.
And now on the voltage, and just to show you the impact of voltage, if you increase the total range on the screen, it's going to be like zooming out of the picture. You can see that the time between the pattern itself really hasn't changed, but the height is absolutely a lot less, right? Really squinched it up.
Squished it up.
And the reverse side, if you raise the voltage, or excuse me, if you decrease the amount of voltage range on the screen, well, now you're zooming in and you're getting a clearer picture. So you can use the two, well, I don't have it in there. It's in your handout, but you see you can use that to tailor the pattern to what you want to see and how you want to see it.
This is more my speed where I need to see it better.
Mm-hmm.
So I rather decrease it after I've
once I've got
acquired
it on
the
there,
signal.
let's tweak it in.
Yep, tweak it in.
Next item to talk about, trigger. There's really three basic options that you have. You have first none, and depending on the scope, you'll generally see a pattern that just kind of pops in and out.
I call it walking, or if you're taking an ASE test, A8, sometimes on L1, walking across the screen, what does that mean? The trigger's not set properly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a walking pattern.
Others, the next one is probably a couple different terms for it, either normal or repeat.
Right, repeat.
Right,
Yep.
which is going to allow you to capture that pattern and keep it on the screen nice and steady. Then there's the single mode, and we're going to actually show that in one of our first tests here. Where you get the one-shot image. That's really good if you're like working by yourself and you want to try to capture something and you don't have an extra pair of hands to help you.
It's like touch hold on a meter. So you want to lock it on there, you give it one shot, and it'll stay on the screen.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So before we go further, any questions?
Yeah, we went over a lot of info there. And again, basic to some, but difficult to others.
Yes.
You know the nice thing about this, rather than me doing a hands-on class, is the nice thing about this is you don't have to be embarrassed. No one knows, no one's looking at you, so you could ask us the questions. We'll give you the answer, and then you need to practice on your own.
We do have a question.
Good.
Okay, we do have a
What is
question.
the method of deciding where to put the trigger?
That's a very good question. That's really up to you. Now, generally, I like to start in, if there are 10 divisions on time, I usually like to come in right about the first or second division line. Where
So
I usually
he's
like to
talking here or here.
Right. That's normally where I like to go.
I usually go to first box. Now, I'll give you an example here. You know, one of the things why I want that first box, I want to see this line of voltage. This is my charging system voltage on the car. Mm-hmm. So I can see right away if the alternator's charging. If this thing's hugging 12 volts and not hugging, 14, 15, or a little more, I can see that. I also want to know when we trigger, that we're maybe stable. I like triggering at 50% of the voltage I'm dealing with. So if this is working at 14 volts, I want to take my trigger and trigger at 7 volts.
Right.
That stabilizes the reading for me.
Yep.
And that's what I like to teach.
And that's the other thing too that as you was mentioning, just to add additional clarification for what he's referring to is the voltage threshold that you're telling the scope to start drawing the picture.
Correct.
Right. So in his case, very good rule of thumb: use half of what you expect, and you'll be sure to catch something. The other side of that is not only what that threshold is, but when that threshold occurs. Is it occurring as it starts from a base voltage and goes up? Or is it from a base voltage and going down? So you select rising slope. If you're looking for it to say, okay, I got a 12 volt system, and I'm going to say, we're doing a primary ignition, for example, and we know that's going to be 100, 200 volts, so we're going to see on the screen, let's pick a 100, and we're going to use that as our voltage level. But I'm going to see it come from 12 up and draw that pattern, so I'm going to set that as a rising voltage. On the injector, maybe I want to see it go from 12 and then get pulled to ground.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on here. This is a falling edge, isn't it? Here's 12 volts going in. The computer's applying ground right here. So you want a slope that is a negative slope or falling slope, okay, depending on what your lab scope says. That is an important thing to know.
Yeah. And then, and if you're doing a single capture like an injector or ignition waveform or something similar, if you want to put it in the middle of the screen, that's up to you. That's the neat thing about using the scope. You do it the way you want to do it.
Yeah. You'll get, the big thing is we all have what we prefer, okay? I mean, Pete and I both prefer to hug that side. The reason why I like that, if I race the motor up, this is going to come this way if I have the right slope on it and the right trigger, right? And then sometimes you may not want to use trigger because trigger is going to lock it in there. And we did this on a video where sometimes you won't find a problem if you triggered. You'd be better to let it free run or just auto capture, okay? So it all depends. You need to practice. These are basic things that you could practice with.
Yeah. And play with it.
Play with it.
That's the whole idea, is get
That's how you
comfortable.
get good at it. Any
other
questions, Pierre?
No.
Okay.
We're just like kind of like feel like we're the twins going to say the same thing at the same time. All right, let's do some testing.
Testing's
What
good.
we're waiting for. Again, these are going to be tests that you can do with any scope you own, and pretty much with whatever it came with when you got it.
Correct.
All right. So let's start with number 1. We're going to start with a battery charging system test because I like this test because it's something you can do. Every car that comes into your shop, every car that comes into your bay, and that's something that we've talked about in the past. One of the comments that we both heard with guys who aren't using their scope or interested in but just haven't really played with it is because, oh, it just takes so much time to get all set up. I got to get it out of the box, and I got to get the leads out, and I got to start the computer, and I got to do all this. And my response to that is, when you go to work in the morning, you turn on the lights, right?
Turn on the scope.
You got it. Yeah, exactly. You got all the other stuff that you're turning on in the morning. Add that scope to your list. Have it up and running and ready. And I gotta say, if you go to any of these automotive groups on Facebook, some of you guys have gotten very creative in building your own
Yes, they've done
scope
some
cards,
nice
man. I've
jobs.
seen some really nice jobs.
Yep.
And it's just ready there, ready to go when you need it. So make that a habit. And the other thing you can do to make a habit so that you can get comfortable with the scope and playing with the settings and playing with the triggers is to perform tests on a vehicle as many times as you get a chance to. And if you're going to do something that's going to help you learn and also benefit your customer at the same time, the battery charging system test is a great way to go.
Oh, yeah. You can save these screenshots and show the customer
Absolutely.
where their voltage dropped down, where it started from, and where it's going to rise to once we check the charging.
Yeah, I mean, you'll find weaknesses in this test that may not show up in other testing methods. And it's not so much for me down south, but for you guys up here in the north, when that weather goes from nice to cold,
Yeah.
the marginal battery is no longer marginal. It's not enough to crank the car. I'm sure that customer would appreciate knowing that in advance, right? Rather
Oh,
than having to
no
call you
doubt.
up, right? So,
And this is good if someone doesn't have a battery tester, and it not only helps them get that information, but makes them get better at using their scope, more proficient.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so
So you
gonna
want me to
kinda move
crank
over
it
to
for
the
you?
scope, and let's talk about what we're doing here first. Make sure that I have everything set up and ready to go.
Yep, and I'll be ready at the vehicle when you are ready, sir.
This.
So if everyone has a scope, you need to take it out of the box, get it all set up, make sure your battery is good. If you're using a scope type, a laptop-based one or a tablet-based one, as Pete said, like we do here, we put our laptops on in the morning. And if we're going to use the scope, it's there, it's up, it's ready to rock and roll. And once you do that, you're all set.
So I'm going to explain real quickly what we're doing as far as the setup goes. Again, this is in that toolbox reference that I mentioned. Don't forget to download that. Right below the players, the link. But we just have one channel right now. There are a few scopes in the market. That's all they are. But they're very competent little scopes in their own right.
Sure.
All we're doing is connecting to the battery with our leads, just like you would your multimeter. And trigger, I'm going to use the single trigger function because what I want to have happen here is once I've filled that screen up with data, I want it to quit. Then I
Oh,
can
so
go
you
back
don't
and
want to
look at
look.
it. Right.
It's like taking a screenshot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I wanted somebody, if I had somebody helping me, maybe I could get them to hit the start stop on the keyboard. But this way, I don't have to do that. It's just going to automatically do it itself. Of course, we only have the one channel to select for as far as the trigger goes, so that's already set up. Let's see if I can make sure I have the trigger amount set up. Now, what do you think I want to use for a trigger? And we're going to do this manually. Whoop, too fast. Slow down, buddy.
You let me know when.
I know I'm starting with a battery that's got open circuit voltage in it, roughly 12 and some change, which we can go back and measure here in a moment. It's going to increase, but I want to catch the drop first, right? So I'm going to go with a falling edge, falling slope. We got that set up, verify that set up correctly. And what kind of voltage level do I want? Well, what's a typical range we're looking for? We don't want it to drop much more than 9.5, right?
Yeah, 9.6 was always the amount on an ASE test. Newer vehicles, you may not want to go under 10.1.
So I'm going to try it at 10 volts, and we'll see what happens. So I got the trigger set up. The scope is let's get that running. We'll get it started. And now we're ready to crank it.
You want me to clear flood it, or you want to start it?
No, go ahead and start it.
Okay.
Ooh, that was noisy. Okay.
Kill it?
Got it. Okay. First, you guys saw that, a lot of hash in the signal, really noisy. That can come from a couple of different things. The underhood environment is very noisy electrically, but this particular model, this particular scope has a way to filter that out. That's set up, and now what you see is very similar to what you see on the screen, right? So we're going to kind of walk back over to the red one there so we can take a look at that in a little more detail. This is just the voltage at the battery. That's all we're going to start with. So let's kind of walk across it, and I want to make sure I'm not going to get too in the way as we do this, and talk about it in terms of testing any electrical system. Again, we're connected to the battery. We're looking at battery voltage. We all know that when we crank the engine over, we're putting a load against that battery that's going to drop the voltage down.
Correct.
Right? That's just basic electronics, basic electrical. So we know we're starting off, and we're starting off with open circuit voltage. That's going to give us the state of charge of the battery. We all know that's got to be around 12.6, no less than 12.4, in order for us to continue.
And you're at 13.6 right there.
Yep, about 13.0, 13 some change. So we got a little surface charge on that, right? But then what I notice is the dip. When we first turn the key on and modules start waking up. So there's a small dip right there that we can see on the screen. And I don't know if you and you can zoom in on most scopes to see that in more clarity, but if you look very, very closely, right there in the corner, you'll see that small little dip. I don't know if you can see that on the screen or not, but that small little dip. That's the moment that the starter solenoid contacts closed. And now we're starting to send that voltage potential into the starter. Okay?
Correct.
And then we see this huge drop in voltage. Now, one of the powers of the scope is how fast you can see something. We're talking milliseconds, nanoseconds when it comes to this. So what we're seeing here, if we were doing a conventional battery test, we might consider that loaded voltage. But it's really not. It's a little something different. We call it inrush voltage.
Correct.
This is what's happened when that starter motor is first trying to turn. It takes something to get that motor to move.
It's like pushing a car, Pete. We have a lot behind it.
Absolutely. That's a great way to explain it. And once we got it moving, it's not so hard, right?
That's correct.
So not only are we trying to get the starter motor moving, but it's got to get moved against all the resistance of the engine components it's attached to, right? So we got to turn that crank. We got to get those rods and pistons moving. All of that is causing this inrush voltage that you see here. As a rule of thumb, I don't like to see that go below 8.5.
Yeah.
Again, it's less than what you would consider in a conventional loaded test.
Right, because this is a lot quicker.
Yeah.
This is different than using a battery load tester.
Right. And as you'll see, when we add current to this, it's also at a much higher current level.
That you will not see on one of those AVRs or VATs or volt amp tester type things.
So as we continue, we start to see the amperage drop or the voltage drop reduce, but now it's got these funny little squiggles in it. Well, let's think about that in terms of what's happening. If the starter motor is just starting to turn over the engine and it's coming up against the resistance of each piston, each cylinder as it's being pushed up through its compression stroke, and it's starting to pick up some speed. Again, that's the power of the scope. It's how fast we're looking at it. is these individual pistons moving in that engine. And you can actually see that's the impact of each individual cylinder, but then it starts picking up speed, and then all of a sudden it cranks and runs.
And look at the voltage difference. So rather than being somewhere about 8-ish, we're somewhere maybe 11-ish, high 10s, 11-ish.
Yeah. Now that is a good loaded voltage.
Right. So in other words, what Pete's telling you is we don't want to look at that first inrush voltage. It'd be like you first pushing the car. A lot of energy has to be used. This is quicker than any of your electronic battery type testers, whether it be Medtronics, Associated, whoever.
Yeah.
Okay. It's quicker than that. So that's why we see a little bit more of a dip, but we level out, and then what happens once we run and start.
And then that upward ramp you see there, now the alternator's spinning, and it's starting to put it back into the battery, what we took out, and finally stabilizes the voltage. And that's an area you don't want to see take too long. It shouldn't take long to put back into the battery what we took out.
Right, unless we had a slip and belt, an alternator problem, something going on, or even sometimes a battery issue can cause that.
All right.
So
you can see the similar things on the one that we captured. Just for giggles, we'll go ahead and pull down see what our inrush level was.
So we're using a cursor to mark it?
So we got right about 9.4. That's well above the 8.5, and we all heard it, right? There was no slow or hesitancy in its ability to spin over. So any questions on just the voltage pattern so far?
Nope.
Very good.
We're ready for part two?
Part two coming up. Now we're going to add current to the pattern. All right, so we make a couple adjustments here.
So we're going to put another channel on. We're going to be doing voltage on 1 and current on channel 2. Now, most scopes when you buy them, well, I would say many scopes when you buy them, Pico is one of them, ATS, you both on those get amp clamps with them. Snap-on, it is additional where you need to purchase them. I think Fluke, you would need to purchase them. A lot of the companies out there, you need to buy them. But Pico includes them, a low amp and a high amp clamp. And in this case, we want our high amp clamp.
Right, and the newest one they offer now is up to 2,000 amps, so it's pretty
so we can
capable.
use it on diesels. Question?
There was a question actually before you started talking amperage. Overlaying a second channel with alternator duty cycle would help, right?
You know, that's a really great question.
That is a
The
good
question was overlaying the alternator duty cycle on a second channel would help. It certainly would help, and if you're diagnosing a charging system related problem.
Correct.
Right? But again, that's the beauty of the scope. You're looking at the relationship between the duty cycle versus the voltage output. The other thing we should be clear to point out is we're giving you some basic fundamental rules of thumb. However, there's a lot of smart charging system strategies in place. You've got to go into the service information and make sure you know how that charging system is going to react. And you can actually see it in this capture, how the voltage level comes up and starts to feed back in, and then it starts to step up again.
Right.
So it's like almost a second stage. Now, I haven't done the homework on this one to see what it's supposed to be, but that's just to give you an idea. You've got to know that. And one of the questions I ask is if you saw 17 volts right after startup in the charging system, would that be a problem? And so many guys will tell me, yeah, 17 volts is overcharging.
Not on today's cars.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So there are some models that do use
you can go up to 17.1, 17.2. They don't stay there long, granted.
No, they don't.
Of course, once battery case temperature hits 125, we'll have a little bit of expansion there and a problem, right? So it's going to do it, but it's going to do it very quickly.
Right.
They need to stabilize all the electronics that we have in a vehicle.
Actually,
Question?
You kind of answered it, but the first question was, so would you want to read into that waveform more closely, further?
And that's again, what the question is do you want to read more, get more information from this waveform? Yes, absolutely. That's why we're kind of going over the elements, and granted, we're kind of go over it kind of quickly, but it's in that handout that we gave you.
Right.
There are more videos in our both TST YouTube and Motor Age YouTube's channel that cover these tests, a lot of these tests in more detail. Surely invite you want to join that. but that's why we're kind of stretching this one at first, because this is something you can, again, every car that comes into your stall, you can hook up and perform this test. It takes no time, and you have a lot of information in it. Now if you really want to get the full package, we got to do what we're getting ready to do. We got to add the current to it, right?
And
So,
you don't necessarily always need to pick the pepper out of the fly dough. What you need to look at is, did the voltage drop to a specific level? On a scope, we said, 8.5, it's probably as low as you want to go. When it levels out, you've seen what we did there. It was somewhere in the 10-ish. So that means you got a good battery that's able to hold up. Now when we do current is work. So we're really going to see what's going on. I'm going to crank it over as Pete explains.
now, before we go and actually crank this over, I do want a couple things about using the amp clamp. Of course, make sure that you zero the tool before you put it on.
Preferably near the
Preferably
load.
near the load. And understand that we're going to see a lot of current coming through here. Now, the other thing I want to point out is, I'm going to go ahead and take it off for a second, you can see it. We can all see that it's got an indicator on there. In this case, it's telling us to face the amp clamp in the direction of the arrow towards the positive post of the battery, okay? So let me stick that back on real quick. And I want to talk about that for a minute.
And let me add something in here. This is a high current probe.
Yes.
Not to be used to check like for parasitic draw unless the specific clamp you purchased is spec'd out for that.
Right. That has
In other words, that you could
cover
read down to milliamps.
Right. Now, that arrow that you saw in the tool is based on the old conventional positive to negative current flow theory. And if we were to put it on in that direction, the current pattern that you're going to see would actually be reversed. We're not used to looking at that, really. We kind of like look at things going up instead of down. So just to make it, if I clear as I can, all I'm doing is I'm ignoring that. I'm going backwards. Instead of facing the positive terminal, I'm facing that arrow towards the negative terminal, so I'll get that pattern going up on the screen rather than down. Now, you can look at it either way you want. In fact, it probably makes a little more sense if you're looking at discharge to look at it going down. But it's been around for so long now, we're all kind of used to seeing it that way. That's why we're going to show it to you that way here.
Yep.
So just verify I've got my trigger set, again, single capture, so I can fill the screen. We're now going to use the current probe as my trigger source, so we'll switch that over to the channel it's on, channel B. I'm going to use 100 amps as my threshold when I tell it to start drawing the pattern. And again, we have it set in about 2 divisions in. We'll go ahead and turn that single trigger on, and we can crank whenever you're ready.
Here we go.
Whoop, my bad.
We didn't have it
You
on,
gotta
did we?
turn the clamp on.
All right. You let me know if you're ready.
That should go. Give it a shot. Oh. Why not?
Well, see, when you do stuff live, things could happen. And this is what will really happen in your shop. Now, whether he's not triggering on that particular channel or the clamp wasn't zeroed, he's double checking all
so
that.
You got to make sure the clamp is all around all of the cables, whether you're going to the positive or negative side, around all of the cables, and the jaws are completely closed. And we got something there, but not quite what I want. So we're going to try that again. Okay, hit it.
Here we go.
Okay, and now the screen's full. We can shut it off. We have our data. And now we've added current to the capture.
And as voltage goes down, what happens to that current?
Oh, that current went way up.
Yeah.
And that's what I really want you guys to see here, just how high that current is. Let's just get an idea, measure it for you. So we'll just kind of grab one of the cursors.
Yep.
And every tool has them. They just operate maybe a little bit differently. And we're drawing 980 amps.
Oh, Pete, that's impossible, isn't it?
Oh.
My battery cable would burn up. No. And here's the reason why it's no. It's happening so quickly.
Yes.
This is what your AVR, people go argue with this all the time. Well, my VAT or my Snap-on unit or whatever company it is, it never goes that high. Of course not. You're looking, this is like a meter versus a scope. This, we could read things very, very quickly.
Right.
Super quickly. And I like right here too, is as the blue fell down, that's the voltage, amperage went right up at the same time. You know, I used to use this years back on my old Sun machine, my old Bear 400, and you can take a picture of it. Back then it was a little hard to freeze on the screen. Bear 400 was okay, but not the original Sun machines. Question, Pierre?
No, actually, somebody had a problem with their audio.
Oh,
Just one.
not us.
No.
All right. So again, like I said, you saw that peak, just like we talked about inrush voltage, same terminology, inrush current. It's just that microsecond amount of current necessary to kick the starter in the butt and get everything moving. And then you can see that very quickly that load drops, and we start to see those same patterns as each piston is moving through that compression stroke. That's what you're seeing there. But you notice that the requirement to keep them moving is dropping as it picks up speed. Go back to your analogy, pushing the car. Once it's rolling, it's not as hard to push anymore. That's what we're seeing here. Picking up speed, finally the engine starts running. And we're starting off on a discharge because we took something out of the battery. It starts to get it put back in, and we let it stabilize. We should have a net current level somewhere around 3 to 5 amps.
So Pete, can we measure what the amperage is? Can we move that cursor down?
Yeah, let's just take a look. If we take a look at something around that, somewhere close to the average, we'll come right here, somewhere in the middle.
Right in the middle. Well, the eyes are not what they used to be. So at about 11 volts.
Let's get a little. Whoop, let's not move that one.
We're about 100 and something amps.
So like about 200 amps, okay, and 11 volts. So that would be a little closer to our when you're taught starter load and battery loaded voltage. It's a little bit closer, so you see the relationship there.
And if we cranked it longer, you know, obviously we may see it even go down and average out at a lower amount. Somewhere probably 175, somewhere in that ballpark.
And in this poor vehicle's defense, we've kind of been beaten on it, so.
Been cranked to death.
The starter motor might be a little warm in preparation.
Let's look at this again. How long, you know, we're yakking with you, but how long did it really take to set this up?
Right.
To check voltage and amperage on the starter and looking at even your alternator and your battery.
Yeah.
You did this, it's probably, in all honesty, a 5 to 10 minute test. Because it's not hard to hook up. We're at the battery, with the amp clamp, and with the leads.
Absolutely. And the other thing I want to point out here, and I believe that's in the handout as well, it's that net. You want to make sure you get around all the cables, because we want to look at what the alternator's putting in and what the system is taking out. What's left over is what I'm interested in. And here's something that you'll find that you can diagnose if you got vehicles that are eating alternators. It could be that there's a sulfated battery that has gone undetected. You'll catch it with this, because if you see that net current rate is higher than normal, generally it's because there's a problem with the battery. Even if it passes conventional load test, capacitance test, whatever, if it's taking it excess current 10 amps or more,
too quick,
then it's putting more heat load in that alternator. And while the alternator is certainly designed to put out a lot of current and a lot of current rather, it's not designed to do it for any long length of time.
Correct.
Right. So that's what we're looking at there. All right. Any questions? Just pop them up if you have any questions, and we're going to keep right on.
We're all good. Okay.
All right, next one on the list. Just want to point out there, if we can take a look at the screen real quick, that I do want to mention, since Pico was so kind to sponsor this, they do have a few features in the scope that could be helpful. One, going back to the regular scopes when you looked at, they have a menu of tests, guided tests, that will help set the scope up for you, give you a sample of a decent waveform, and then you go ahead and take your test and you can compare. This particular one is actually part of their diagnostic suite, which you can download to go with their scopes as well. This is doing pretty much what we just did, right? The blue traces the voltage that we looked at, the red trace the current. You have to plug in some numbers for yourself. You have to talk about the temperature of the battery, some other factors, the cold cranking amps, let it know what it's testing against. But then it's not only going to perform the test, it's going to provide you with test results as well. Now imagine being able to hand that to a customer.
It's very impressive. And you can see that here, overcharge, your lowest voltage. It gives you really a very nice detailed report that you could print out or text them or email or whatever.
And if you've got that marginal battery, especially you guys are up there north, that's a battery sale. Right?
Yeah. Well, it should be a battery sale everywhere.
All right, on to the next test. Here's a known bad. Again, we're still working on battery charging systems. But look at the difference in that pattern. I mean, the current is absolutely a smudge. Looks terrible. The blue pattern, the voltage pattern also, you can see, is really smudgy. So what's causing that? Well, again, that's where we're going to talk about AC coupling. And what we're doing here is we're looking at a pattern that's what we just looked at on the voltage line, but we're going to focus on just the AC component of the signal. And what does this allow us to do? Instead of having to look at something, we want to look at something very small, very close up, but because it's being carried on that 12 or 14 volt signal, it would be off our screen.
Way off your screen.
You wouldn't be able to see it. So all we're doing is we're taking the DC component out. We're pulling that 12 volts out and leaving the AC behind. Again, this is a feature every scope I'm aware of has.
Yes.
It's part of your drop-down menu. It also comes to play in some tests that we're going to look at here in a little bit. By using that feature, if I'm not worried about the actual voltage amount, DC voltage or current amount, I can use AC coupling just to focus on the variance from peak to peak. And in some cases, that's really going to help us find problems.
Yes.
Okay?
No doubt.
That's AC coupling.
So
Question.
most of the time in automotive, we DC couple. So in case you're not familiar with that, on a scope, you would have AC or DC. You would, in this case, we want to AC couple it.
This was more of a comment than a question,
Okay.
and it was mentioned a couple of times. They've seen of lowest voltage of around 7 volts and claimed that it's still passed. Now, I'm not sure what that means about passed, but I guess there was no problem with the vehicle.
Oh, back
I'm going to give
here.
you
The lowest point in the voltage.
and I'm going to give you a really great example of that. My own personal truck. I was performing this test for another project, and it came in at 7.6. And I ignored it. And I live in Florida. We don't get coal often.
No.
But the first time
believe
we
me.
did, I got a call from my kid who was borrowing the truck telling me that the truck wouldn't start. And it needed a new battery. Yeah, it still might start the truck just fine. But in my mind, if it's below 8.5, that battery's not for this earth much longer. If we do something that's going to add more strain to it, or the weather changes, or something like that, I personally would not have a problem telling my customer that it's fine today,
But it's going to go.
it's going to go, and it's pretty soon. All right, so that's what I would say. All right.
Any other questions before we move on?
No.
Okay.
All right.
Next item on the agenda. Again, what we're looking at here in this particular example are the AC, the diodes in the alternator. So this is a way to tell the condition of the diodes. And I'm pretty sure I have this in the handout. You're looking here is obviously a bad example as compared to, well, I don't have the comparison on the slides, but it's in the handout. It shows you what known good, what known
Smaller.
bad is. Generally, anything over half a volt measured top to bottom is bad. Do
So
I care?
peak to peak.
Exactly. Do I care if it's shorted or open or what? No, I don't. All I know is that it's bad.
Right.
So I know that the alternator in our previous example, right now we know here the alternator might be charging, which we can see from the voltage level, but it's pulling it in and out just as fast as it's, you know what I mean? You're getting that pulse going on.
Right.
And you can see that also in the current. And here's the other thing with AC ripple, which is what this is called, if you didn't know. Well, another problem with that AC ripple is control modules hate AC ripple because they don't know how to act.
Right.
You know, a computer is simple on, off, yes, no, ones and zeros. So when you start throwing something in, it's like one, no, zero, no, half, no, 7, no, and then bouncing around like that. It doesn't know how to act. And if it doesn't know how to act, it just decides not to do anything.
And AC always rides on DC. And this is another reason you've all heard about programming and you need a clean battery
Oh, yeah.
maintainer. Okay?
Absolutely.
That's because we're dealing with AC voltage. And as Pete said, computers do not like it when AC, the dipping of up and down of the voltage, that can really mess you up. And you may take out a module that way.
Yeah. And
Not a good idea.
If you want to see it, then use your scope and hook up your charger.
Yeah. Just did that in one of my
look at it yourself.
classes. We hooked up the meter and the scope on a battery charger, and I showed them the difference between an old charger we had around and a smart charger, one being Medtronics, one being Associated, and how clean the new ones are. There's practically nothing. you got to blow it up. And that's what you need when you program it.
Right.
This is actually a Pierre comment.
Okay.
You really should scan the car for voltage or network codes when you're tracing down problems because of those types of issues where something in the charge system is corrupting the way the computers are working.
No doubt. And that's why it is that test of checking AC voltage. It's one of our normal tests. So I think we're ready to move over here.
The next. Now, next we're going to move into is going to build on what we just learned doing all this battery charging system stuff.
And no extra special hookup. We don't have to do anything else.
No extra special hookup. We are still in the same place we were. But if you guys remember, when we were looking at either the voltage line or the current trace, we could see the impact of each cylinder as it was moving through compression. Not for long because the engine quickly started. So some tech got the bright idea to just watch it while it was running because of that relationship. And that's how a lot of things get started in our business, isn't it?
Right.
Some guy goes like, I wonder what would happen if, and they come up with this testing method, and now it's common knowledge. So we're going to just rearrange here. We're going to go ahead and just take the voltage out of the equation for a minute. We'll turn that channel off. We're going to leave everything the way it was, the trigger settings, everything the way it was. Let's see.
And we're setting it up.
And now what we're going to do is we're going to perform the relative compression test by looking at the current being demanded by the starter motor, and that's going to be directly linked to what kind of work it's trying to do. It just makes common sense that if the cylinder's working the way it should, it's going to take more than to turn the cylinder through that's not working the way it should.
Right. And this is an important first step to check the engine. Now, is it 100% accurate? No, and what do I mean by that? There are certain vehicles that you're going to come across that may have a variable valve timing or some sort of a camshaft issue that this won't pick up, but nor will a regular compression gauge.
Right.
And then you would get into the stuff that we're not talking about tonight,
Yeah.
with transducers.
Something to keep in mind, that when we're doing this is that we're looking for that anomaly. We're looking for that weak cylinder to show up, and we'll look at that too. But we're talking and we'll go crank it. So
and a
now,
quick
in
test.
this case, in this vehicle, we can hold the throttle wide open, which you want to do anyway. Hold the throttle wide open. I thought John Thornton said this very clearly at the big event. I love what he said. If you're going to do a test like this, perform it the same way on every vehicle. In either case, just like you would do a compression test, you're wide open throttle. Yeah, are there some models where the throttle blade's not going to move because of the electronic throttle assembly? Yes, but does that matter? No, do the test the same way every single time you take that variable out of the equation. John Thornton, thank you so much for that, that great advice.
And another little note, not every car has clear flood.
Right.
Anything over 8,501 pounds here in the U.S. is not OBD2 compliant, even though it has an OBD plug. If it's over 8,501, you will not have clear flood, and not every vehicle, even under 8,501, has clear flood.
Yep.
So you may have to disable fuel. Always disable fuel, not ignition.
Yep, absolutely. Disable fuel so you don't wash down the cylinders in the process. So
Yep.
you should
Ready?
be good whenever you're ready. Oh, maybe not. We'll have to start over. Gotta wait for it to cycle.
That's not me. This is new cars do this automatically.
All right, go ahead.
Here we go.
My bad. All right. You have to turn the amp clamp on. That's a good thing to remember.
Was this a timeout on this one?
And this one, this new Pico clamp that they supplied for us for this evening, it will automatically shut off so you don't wear the battery down. So I had to reset.
And that's a good thing because I can tell you,
how
you
many times
wear
have
it down. Ready?
Yeah. 1 sec. Let's see, we got everything ready.
And by the way, you're gonna learn all the little problems that you may encounter. Maybe you don't have this, you have the old style amp clamp. Always keep an extra 9-volt battery around. 9-volt batteries tend to dip and they will change your readings. So that's something that you need to look at. And again, zero it with the jaw closed next to where you're gonna connect to. And as Pete mentioned earlier, go around all the negative wires, or if you're on the positive side, all the positive wires. Make sure the arrow is facing in the right way. That way we're getting the right reading.
Right. I think we're okay.
All right, let's try
Let's see
it.
what happens. Nope.
No? And again, the real world, when things just don't go right. This is going to happen in your shop.
Disappeared.
You say when, brother? So any questions while we're waiting? Pete's making some adjustments on the scope.
No, we're pretty good.
And usually, you know, when we had it on before, if I guess the clamp didn't turn off, when you were doing your starter test, all you needed to do was continue to crank it and we would have the same reading. We would have had more of those humps. Are we triggering on that channel, Pete? Maybe you were triggering on channel A and
No,
this is
I got
on
the
channel B?
channel right. I maybe have an issue with my old laptop here.
Ah. And by the way, that's another thing. Sometimes you don't need the latest, greatest laptop, but you do need one that'll function properly. Pierre knows that. Pierre has gone with some aggravation on some of his older laptops. We cycle laptops here out probably about every 3-4 years. They've about had it. So, you know, if you're going to get one, make sure it has some good memory in it and that it functions properly.
All right, hit it.
All right, I think we're ready.
There we go.
This poor starter, there's nothing I can do.
Oh,
You lost it.
I lost it. Hit it one more time.
Here we go.
All right.
You got it on single.
There we go.
All right.
Hey, we got it.
It only took
Sometimes
a few
it's a little
minutes.
manipulation. Sometimes it's operator error. Just like you said, pilot
Hey,
error.
but Pete, it's the real world. This is what,
That's what
everyone's going to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so.
It happens.
Anyway, again, you can see what we already discussed. We got that inrush current. That's that high peak that we talked about earlier. We know it's picking up speed. And then this is what we're focusing on, though, is the part once it's stable. And what we want is these peaks to all be uniform. If we see one that's lower than the others, then that's a problem. That's the one we want to focus on.
Or higher jumps up. Anything that's an anomaly is going to be an issue.
Right.
You have something behind it.
There was a question here. Somebody said, I've heard that 30 amps peak to peak is the limit in those oscillations. Is that true?
That's a great question. The question is 30 amp peak to peak? In other words, from bottom to top, is that the limit? No, I don't. I'm just that's not true. Here's what I've seen. I've seen and quoted, in fact, I believe this was from Mr. Thornton, was in the 50 amp range. Typically. What you'll find, though, is that, and this point we wanted to mention, if you have a situation, say a timing chain or belt that's slipped a tooth, the timing's been retarded for some reason, you're going to see effect on compression, aren't you? And you're going to see it across all of the cylinders. So the pattern is going to look, initially, is going to look fine. But if you're doing this on every car that comes in, and again,
you get to be good at it.
You did the battery charging system test. How much longer would it take for you to real quickly grab a relative compression on that same vehicle? And you see these peaks and then all of a sudden you see one that's squinched up. Right?
This is not going to take long to view.
No.
Not at all.
So to go to answer the question, no, I would not use that 30 amp peak to peak. That's not the max. I've seen more than that. But if I do see something getting low, and I have a drivability problem, I'm going to be looking at
You can investigate a little deeper.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a good quick check that you should do on every drivability issue. And if you're just checking as we're doing here, the battery and starter, it really is just cranking it longer and freezing it.
Yeah.
Taking off the voltage channel, blow this up if you need to blow it up. And most scopes have that feature where you can blow it up and start to pick the pepper out of the fly do.
Which we have an example of on the screen behind you there.
Yep.
I mean,
Take a
there's an
quick
example. Okay, go ahead.
Well, there was actually, so what is the minimum range?
I do not, the question is there a minimum range for that peak to peak? I do not have an answer for you. It's been my experience that if I have a drivability issue and I see it low, then as G said, I'm going to go dig deeper into the issue. If I have no drivability issue and I see it low, then I'm going to think that's probably okay.
Right.
You know, because I'm not dealing with any other symptoms. This is relative. That's the name of the test. It's relative to all the other cylinders, and it's relative to that engine. That's
And it's not 100% accurate on every one of them,
right?
But it's a good 80-something%. And what do I mean by that? Because we're dealing with a lot of variable valve timing cars, and issues with different camshafts, timing chains. You really got to know the motor you're working on.
Right.
And you know what I liked? Years back, I bought the AES WAVE file. Actually, George sent me his DOS version originally. And I saved stuff on DOS and had all these Pico you could save in. You could save in Snap-on. You can save in ATS. You could save in all these. Save them. Do them. And that way you can compare and get better. If you know you're working on a 3.2 liter or a 5 liter or 5.7, whatever the case may be, take it, save it, and go back and review. Hey, that car had no problem.
Yep.
This one looks a little different than the 5 I did. That's how you get good at it.
Fantastic. I'm glad you brought that up. Most of these tools now, they're PC based, like G said.
Easy.
You know, easy for you to save the files. But the question, my problem was organizing them. So I'm going to refer you back to motorage.com. Put in Eric Ziegler's name. He's one of our contributors. He's also a nationally recognized trainer. He wrote a great article for us on how to organize your data so that you can find it again when you want to grab hold of it. And as you mentioned, yes, you can do this in every car that comes in. Save the data.
Yeah.
Start building up that library. Save that information.
Make those files. Yep.
Now back to the relative compression test. Here's what you're really looking for. If you got a customer who's come in, it's got a misfire. Maybe it's not setting a code, but you can feel it in the seat of your pants. One of your concerns is it's engine mechanical.
Right.
And to do a compression test, traditional compression test on a modern engine, especially any kind of V design, that's money.
Big money, big time.
Yeah, I've seen flat rate times as high as 3 hours to do a transverse V6. How are you going to go to your customer and say, let's see, my $100 an hour, 3 hours, Mr. Customer or Ms. Customer, I suspect you have an issue with one of the cylinders. I'm not sure which one. I need to do a compression test to figure that out. May not be the problem, but I need to perform this test. It's going to cost you $300 just for me to perform the test. May not fix your car, but it'll tell me where I need to go. What do you think your customer's going to tell you?
Go somewhere.
Yeah, no, I'm not doing that. So if I perform this test and I see something like you're seeing here on the screen, where we have one that's lower than the rest, now I have a strong suspicion that yes, there is definitely a problem. Now I can go back to that customer with some kind of verification saying, I know there's a problem, but we need this more in-depth testing to figure it out, and now I can justify that expense.
And let's say if you were working on a Ford with the IDS, or you were working with Toyota TechStream on a Toyota or a Lexus car, guess what? They have it built in their scan tool. But you may not own those tools, but you do have a scope, and that's what we're here for. So we do relative compression on every drivability problem that comes out.
Oh yeah, me too. We
do it all the time. Now, like I said, we know 85% of the time, because we get a lot of new cars in, that new 15%, you're going to have to do a different way. It's still good to do a quick eyeball of it, but you may not pick everything up.
Absolutely. Now, question is, we saw that low valley, but we don't know which cylinder it is.
Where is it?
We can see the forest, but we don't know where we're at in the middle of the forest. So one other scope technique that you want to add to your arsenal is the use of a reference signal. It's that signal that tells you where you are in the forest. And for most engine parameters, the best one to use is ignition.
Correct.
Right? So what you're seeing here is now we've added a reference to that, and that's just an ignition source. It could be a secondary or primary. Some even still have the inductive pickup that you could use around. Of course, we don't see many spark plug wires anymore.
No.
But you want to add a reference. All we're doing here is picking a cylinder. I don't care which one it is. Take the one that's easiest to get to.
Right, and just count in the firing order
just
from
use
that.
the firing order, right? Now, we're going to show you that in a moment, but because we're on an ignition signal here, I want to say a quick word about this, attenuation.
No doubt.
Every scope has a limit as to what you can pump into it, right? Just like your meter does. You want to know what that limit is on your tool. We raise this up, especially when it comes to looking at ignition, because at least for me, you can chime in, I'm sure, the best way to look at the ignition system, and we'll do that, is to go to the primary side of the ignition, because everybody's using coil on plug, right?
Exactly.
So it's a lot easier to tap in that. I'm going to see the same things I'm going to see in the pattern, but it's easier to tap into the primary. However, again, this goes about that foundation stuff we talked about. Your electrical foundation comes into play when you're using a scope. It comes into great play. And one of the things, if your foundation is solid, is that you'll understand the way that coil works. We know, I think everybody can tell me that I'm going to put current through the primary, and then I'm going to turn it off, because I'm going to build this magnetic field, and I'm going to turn it off, and the magnetic field collapses, that energizes the secondary, and that steps up the voltage, and that fires the plug. That's the
it's a big transformer.
Exactly, it's the trade school explanation. But what happens after the plug fires and that magnetic field collapses? Well, that energy's got to go somewhere. It goes right back into the primary windings and does the same thing. It creates a voltage spike there. And that can get up pretty high on some of these coils, higher than what maybe your scope can handle. So every scope out there has some method of attenuating or reducing that input signal to a level your scope can handle. In this case, this is the Pico 10-to-1 attenuator. All that means is for every 10 volts going in, 1 volt's coming out, right? And on the Pico scope, I can select the menu item, I can tell the scope, I got an attenuator in there, and it's going to automatically set up the scaling for me. I'm still going to get a real-time measurement of what the voltage level is,
it's just,
but it's going to be adjusted automatically for me. If not, you have to do that yourself.
It's a resistance that cuts down the voltage.
Right. All right, so we got the known bad. Here again, we're looking at the firing order, how to use the firing order for that. Just happened to trigger the same cylinder that had the issue. So we got right onto it. But again, 4 was up front on this particular vehicle. 1's buried in the back. So I'm not going to try to dig out 1.
5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yep, there you go.
So it doesn't matter which one you pick.
Right. So I'm going to hold off on adding the firing line to the live one for the time being, because we're going to look at primary ignition all by itself in a moment. I want to move on to this next item here, because I want to show everybody that you don't need an amp clamp to perform the relative compression test. If you go back to where we started with the battery charging system test, you remember we saw voltage drop, right? We saw the same little humps there, because again, if there's more load on the starter, there's more voltage drop. If there's less, there's less. And we can see that in the voltage line just as easily as we could on the current line. So again, if you're starting off, you got that little pocket 1 channel, you can still perform a relative compression test on
But
that
we
vehicle.
have to do what? AC couple it.
Oh yeah, so it'd be just like metal thing going on here, just like zooming in. I can do it on most scopes. I can do it like with the Pico. I got to give them credit. They have the power that I can actually zoom in on those lines, and I can see it the way I want to see it, and I can adjust it so I'll see it the way I want to see it. But if you're using any other scope, this is where AC coupling comes into play, because what I'm focused on, what am I focused on? I'm just looking at the peaks and valleys. Are they uniform? Do I care what they measure?
Exactly.
I don't care.
No.
So let's, and we haven't tried that yet on this one. So let's going to take that voltage channel that we've been playing with. We're going to put AC coupling on it, and we're going to bring it back down, and we'll run that relative compression.
Are you going to run the amp clamp on it too, so you can see both of them, or are you going to run them off?
Yeah, no, we can do that, I guess. Let's see.
Kill a couple of birds with one stone.
So we'll bring that up. Quick note while I'm getting all this back together again. Time base. We talked about the time base, and we talked about the 20/20 rule. Obviously, the engine's cranking over more than once. So I've changed the time base. We're running at 500 milliseconds, half a second per division, which would give us 5 seconds,
5 seconds
across the screen, right? So that's the reason for that. All right, so we're going to double check. I'm going to keep the same trigger, because since we got the current still in there, I put AC coupling on for the voltage, but now I'm not looking at a 20 volt range anymore, am I? Because I'm not focused on how much voltage I'm measuring, and I don't care if the peak goes off the screen. I want to see what happens after it stabilizes, and I get the peaks and valleys. That's what I want to look at. So let's see what that does. This will be new for me. It'll be giggles for me tonight.
While you're setting that up, there's a question. What is AC coupling?
Okay, again, the question came up is, what is AC coupling? We talked a little bit about that earlier. Every voltage signal has a DC, what's called a DC component. That's what you see when your meter is set on DC. That's the 12 volts, the 14 volts that you're seeing on your screen. But there's AC riding on that signal. That's like typically when it comes to looking at alternators, you're looking at the function of the diodes. If you think about how an alternator works, it's producing AC voltage. It's producing first positive, then negative, and we've all remember the sine wave from back in old math class in school, and that's what you're getting out. But we can't use that in the vehicle's DC electrical system, so we have to have some way to rectify that, to clip that off and just take the tops off so we have DC coming out. That's what the diode pack's supposed to do. When it fails, it starts to allow too much AC through. So AC coupling is just a way to remove the DC current, the DC element out of the signal and leave the AC behind. Okay, so I hope that clarifies that. And just, again, some information in the handout. All right, so.
Ready?
No, not quite yet. Let's see if we get that back.
And all your scopes, you'll see where it says
And go.
DC, just switch it to AC. Here we go.
All right.
Good?
Right now I've got, again, you see the voltage drop. And is this almost like a mirror image, isn't it? Can everybody see that? This is like a mirror image of the two patterns. The only difference here, if I'm looking at voltage, I have to keep in mind that it is inverted. If I really want to see the peaks, I've got to turn that around.
You got to turn it the opposite way.
Okay? So you can either invert the screen with the menu functions, or just switch your leads.
Yeah.
Just switch the leads on your meter. All right?
Yeah, you switch it on the scope and it'll read the exact way. This way it looks like it just fits into each other.
Yeah. But it's telling us the same thing. We're seeing the exact same thing.
And you know, a good thing to do when you want to try this, you want to become proficient at it. This is not, and I get a lot of people that ask me this, oh, I tried that and it didn't pick up a bad coil or injector. This is not for that. This is for engine mechanical. So if you took out a spark plug, disabled fuel, disabled spark, then tried it, you would see the problem. Mm-hmm. And then start believing in the process. You make a little leak in the motor, mechanical. If you can take a valve cover off and, you know, adjust the valve, make it loose rather than working fully, you would see this issue.
Yep.
Now again, certain minute things where a valve is just closing a little bit, you're going to have a problem with. Most of the cars, this is going to be helpful information on. Super helpful.
All right. On to the next. Now, again, here you're looking at an image on the presentation slides. The blue is just like you saw here. This is the in this particular case was the starter current, like we used to. And then the other two are just inverted voltage. One is taken at a breakout box at the diagnostic link connector. So I didn't even have to get out of the truck.
It's a lazy man's way.
And then the other is, as we're doing here, is right there at the battery. So I just want to stress again that we can see the same thing. You can see the same thing. And again, we're still hooked up the same place we hooked up to do the battery charging system test.
If you're doing the breakout box like this AES one, you're in pin 16, which is power. That is into the OBD2 connector. Pin 4 is chassis ground. And again, you're clear flooding it, and bingo. You're doing the exact same thing. And like Pete said, if you want to reverse the leads so they match up rather than switching your channel reverse, whatever floats your boat, it's all good.
And again, just to point out, because of the goodwill and support that Pico's shown us, I do want to point out that they do have a relative compression test built not only into their guided menu, but in the diagnostic suite as well. Now, this is showing up as a bar graph. The way it works on the Pico, though, is that it's going to go by the strongest cylinder, not necessarily in firing order. Well, it's going to go by the strongest cylinder first, and then the rest in firing order. It really doesn't help us identify which one it is. But again, it's very quick. This is doing the same thing we just did. It's looking at the same thing we just did on the voltage side of the battery, but uses the software to provide you this graph, which you can see.
It's a little more eye candy, which is nice.
Yeah, again, something I can take to the customer and say, Mr. Customer, see, this particular bar is yellow. When it's low, it goes yellow, or I think it goes red.
I think it goes red.
Really
I think
bad.
when it goes way under.
And this is the reason I need to go in deeper to solve this problem. All right. Very quickly, a few notes on some additional tools, as we mentioned, get a good foundation. but there's so many things that you can test with the scope with these accessories. For example, you're looking at vacuum sensors, you're looking at pressure vacuum transducers, all of these things that are available to help you in drivability diagnostics. But before you make that kind of investment into your tooling, make sure you're comfortable with the basic scope. And I know I've seen that before.
You could make this up. In fact, I just went over this on a little YouTube video. This is a 9-volt battery in this project box with a 9-volt to 5-volt 9-volt to 5-volt regulator. And here's a GM map sensor, a vacuum hose, and you want to cut this hose shorter, okay? The shorter the better so we don't lose it. You ground your scope to the black lead here. You put the red one on the signal wire of your scope here. This becomes a vacuum transducer.
Yeah.
It's an easy way for you to get into using transducers. Probably this whole thing with everything you see here, maybe 50, 60 bucks with a good GM map sensor.
Yeah.
Or buy all the rest of the stuff they have.
All right, next thing I want to go into, how many of you guys watching remember the old days of the strobe timing light? We used to have marks on the harmonic balancer, and we get the timing light out, and we hooked it up to the coil wire on the distributor, and we could check and adjust timing back in the day. Now, there's no marks, there's no adjustment. The computer takes care of all that. But can base timing still be an issue?
You bet.
Yeah, of course it can. So how are you going to check that? I don't think of any other way you can check that except with the use of a scope.
Exactly.
And all we're doing is going back to what we've already done. We originally had the relative compression test that we did. We had our reference, that ignition event. But think about it a minute. When does that event occur? Just before top dead center. So if I start looking at the pattern, does it make sense that current demand, that peak, is going to happen right at the most difficult moment of that piston reaching top dead center just before transitions? So that's going to be pretty close to TDC, right? And then I'm looking at the firing line, the reference that I have for the ignition. If it's right there at the peak or very, very close to that peak, probably good bet ignition timing is okay.
Correct.
Right? If there's something out of whack, if there's a cam out of sync, timing belts jumped, I'm going to see that shift, usually to the left, right? Because that's retard goes to the left, man's to the right. And it would be noticeable because you're looking at least 10 degrees shift. That's going to make quite a difference that you'll be able to see once again with your scope.
Yeah, makes life a lot easier if you start using this.
Yep. If you really want to get into it, again, that's when you get in deeper. We'll look at the in-cylinder pressure stuff, showing that when the ignition event occurs, when the injection event occurs, all the information you need to know about the health of that motor is right there.
Ignition, injection, and your pressure peaks.
All right, on to number 6. We're not going to do this on the live vehicle, but I did want to mention this because, again, this comes into play even more so now. Cam crank sync, we used to use that for timing checks quite a bit.
Yep.
But I got to point out here, and I want you to make a note of this, you can't just look at the pattern and figure out where they're supposed to line up. You have to have a known good. How are you going to get a known good? Well, number one, you start building your own database. You hook up to known good, and you save the data, and you put that in the books. But now you guys are lucky. I mean, now you have so many sources you can go to get known good patterns. I see guys all the time reaching out on these Facebook social groups, automotive groups, saying, hey guys, I need a good known good of XYZ. Next thing you know, somebody across the other side of the country goes, hey, no problem, here's the file. And we've actually had one of our contributors, Brandon Steckler, actually wrote a story for us about such an instance where he and some others were helping a guy across the pond in England. And I think he was the same guy that showed up at your big event.
That's correct. Yep.
So, I mean, this goes to show it's not just helping each other in the neighborhood. I mean, you guys are reaching around the world. In fact, to you guys who signed up from other countries, thank you so much.
Definitely,
and,
thank you.
I don't know how to say all the different languages. Hello and goodbye.
Hey, we won't try that.
And we say down south, hey, how you doing? All right. Yes, we have
This is another Pierre comment. I'd like to add that you should probably try to hook a scan tool up and see what it's recording as a cam advance, if it's reported PID, just to make sure your variable valve timing isn't different between your known good and your actual car you're testing.
That's a very good point that Pierre brings up, especially with variable valve timing or the old Vanos systems, right? You want to know the scan tool data can tell us, hey, the timing is being advanced or retarded. Then that's going to change what we're looking at here.
Absolutely.
But if not, if everything's hunky-dory, then a lot of times they don't do anything at idle. You can get yourself a good pattern.
And on many engines now, you've got more than one, right? So that's where the multi-channels on your scope come into play. I can look at a variety of cam sensor signals versus the crank. And then if I want to take the scan tool and command the VVT one direction or the other, what do you think is going to happen to your capture on your screen?
It's going to
You're
move.
going to see it shift. So I don't really need a known good for that particular case. I can see it moving, and I can also, with a little talent and a little time, tell exactly how much it moved. A lot of these scopes now have the ability to place rulers out that will break it up into degrees if you can identify the whole 720 revolution.
Correct.
Which, again, if you start looking for commonalities in the pattern, you wouldn't be too hard to find that. But these are just, again, some of the ways that you can use your tool to
and we have one we just did on a Corvette, a 1992 Corvette, with the optical distributor where we had to do the cam and crank sync, and the vehicle was dropping out. That's what helped us find the problem. So it's something you really can use. I mean, optical distributors are pretty old, but you can use it on any crank sensor to see if it's dropping out, right? Cam and crank.
Again, something that, again, any scope that you got will allow you to perform the next test we're going to touch on. Remember, we tapped in ignition as our reference signal, but now we can look at it a little deeper, and we can actually take a look at the individual elements of the pattern. Now, I'm not even going to begin to try to give a lesson on ignition waveform analysis. That's a whole topic all by itself.
Go to Mac Vanderbrink. You can see some on our TST channel. He's the father. But if you go back there just 1 second to this pattern, just real quick, I'll do a real quickie of here is the electronic close into here. That is dwell time that is measured. Dwell is the amount of time that the coil is building up before it fires. That's the firing line. Here's our spark line. If our spark line has a little slope, that's good. No jaggies in them, as Mac Vanderbrink used to say. If it's up like this, it's usually a lean condition. If it's down like that, it's usually a rich condition or closed gap.
And if it's going both ways, then you've got some turbulence in the engine. You've got a valve that's not sealing 100%.
Correct. And your coil oscillations here, if you don't have at least a few of them, you got a problem. That's a crash course in primary. We should also say not every car's coil you're going to hook up on coil on plug is going to give you a primary. Some have built-in modules and it's controlled by the computer. You only get a square wave. Now, one way, that we get past some of this, it reminds me of the old quad 4 motors. Where you had the cassette or the old Saabs that you guys may be into. What you can do there is lift it up, put wires in between, okay? And in the wires in between, then you can use that thing that we never really use to go on an ignition wire. You get a secondary pattern. Caution, caution, caution. Make sure you got your scope, a good ground, and if it needs an attenuator, you better put it on because you can burn your scope out. If not the complete scope, a channel. So that is the warning we gave you before. Both on primary and secondary. Most of the time, secondary will kill your scope.
And
you have a great tool there.
This is just another example of a tool that you can use. This is, again, it's Pico's coil on plug paddle. Other companies make similar tools. But the whole idea is here is that if you have, like I said, you have where it can contain the igniter is actually in the coil, then you can take and place this on top of the coil, and all it's doing really is picking up on that collapsing magnetic field. So exactly what you're seeing on your scope. And just to go back to what we're saying here about the ringing, the oscillations that you see here, what did we talk about before? It collapses in the primary, energizes the secondary, but then it collapses in the secondary and goes back into the primary. And that energy is back and forth until it dissipates. That's what you're seeing there. And that's what allows us to access this pattern. The other thing I want to show you here is just how high or how much voltage is in that pattern. Now, I believe this is a pure secondary, so we'll actually have to do it on the truck to show that. But again, it's high enough that you got to make sure that you use that attenuator to protect your scope.
And on Snap-on, where you got the stackable grounds, be very, very careful that those grounds will not hit anything and come off, because without protecting it with the ground, you will do scope damage. Are we ready to head on that, or?
Well, let's see. I'm going to this is adding the coil. I said, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to show the rest on the car, and then we'll come back to this screen and explain what we're talking about there. So
all right.
we'll go ahead and reshift that up. A couple of minor changes here.
You got to change a couple of channels. If you have your channels hooked up, you'll be able to just switch them over, and you should not have a problem.
So where is that green one?
I get the easy job. I'm in this nice, comfortable, brand new truck.
Now again, like we were looking at so far with some of the patterns we were looking at, we wanted to catch that initial whatever we were going to see. We wanted to see that initial inrush voltage. We wanted to see that initial inrush current and so on. I'm not too concerned about it when I'm going to look at an ignition or later on an injector pattern. That's going to be repetitive, or should be. So I don't have to worry about that single trigger. We're going to just set this up as a repeat so it'll continuously play across the screen. And on my scopes, that will actually stack up and record a lot of that data. It'll give me a lot of different screens that I can go back and thumb through later. So we're going to have that set up. I've got this actually is set on channel C. That's our green trace. I've already told the scope that I'm using an attenuator, so it's going to scale accordingly. The scale we're using is minus 100 to a plus 400 volts. We'll set up a trigger. We're going to use a rising slope. We'll keep it at the 20% range. That's second division over. And let's see. Let's just go with, we'll go with 30 and see what happens. And we'll start it up.
All right, here we go.
All plugged in. Let me make sure the connections are where we want them. That's there.
Good to go?
And we should be good to go. All right, now, again, live webinar. What can we tell you? We'll leave it running for a few minutes. What did I fail to adjust? I failed to bring my time setting back to my 20/20 rule, so you can see what we saw. Just like we said you would. If you add more time, the pattern's going to decompress. It's going to compress. So rather than seeing just one capture, like I would like to be able to analyze it,
yeah.
I need to decrease the time.
Correct. Decrease
right,
it
so that I can see it better. And how long does it take for a spark plug to jump? A couple milliseconds.
Yep.
So let's just use that. We're going to change the time from 500 to 2 milliseconds per division. That's going to give us 20 milliseconds across the screen. We'll start it up again. And there we go. Okay, now we've got something we can look at. Now we've got an issue pattern we can look at. You can see that we're peaking, oh goodness, way up there, close to 400 volts. This scope is not going to handle 400 volts going up its butt. So I need that attenuator. If I didn't have that, we'd be putting on a smoke show for you tonight.
And so the electronic closing, if we move this over this way, rather than you got it on 20?
So we can see some more something. We're just going to move that over so we can see the dwell time that G was talking about.
And there you go.
Here we go.
Here's our electronic closing. There's the firing line. There's our spark line. There's our coil oscillations. And you got primary. Now, if you want to make this bigger, you won't see the peak anymore, but we could play with the voltage setting and it'll make this all look bigger. No. You could also do the blow up.
I'm going to play with some of Pico's neat features here. And actually, let's adjust the scaling, which is kind of like blowing it up. And then we'll bring that up to where we can see it again. And now we've just kind of opened it up a little bit where you can see it a little even better. This is what we talked about earlier about the whole thing of voltage drop too. I want to talk about. We're starting off what? When we're putting the voltage into the primary side, it's going to be running voltage, whatever the charging voltage is. That's what we're seeing coming in here. And now the computer is going to pull that to ground to start to build up that coil saturation. That should pull that to ground. If we zoom in on that very closely, we're going to see how much voltage drop is in that circuit. But I want to caution you, any component that's grounded through the control module is going to have what's called a floating ground. It's going to be offset some.
Correct.
If you really want to get an accurate representation of that, then I would have to go back to the ECU's ground and check it there. But typically, maybe half a volt, 0.7 of a volt offset is normal. If I saw anything much more than that, I'd want to look at that more closely. Now, while that's going on, let's go ahead and add current to it.
So he's going to put another channel on. And now this is going to be a different current probe that we're on.
Now this is a little lower current, so we're using a current clamp that's specifically made for low current. I've already told the scope that that's what we want to do.
And there's our current probe.
Now we need to, I don't want to zoom that, we'll bring that back to normal. Now this is kind of a funky looking little capture here. And if I wasn't knowing what we were doing here, it would probably kind of confuse me a little bit. We're just going to take the other channel out for just a moment, just so we can see just the current. Because I want to explain that. Bring it down, we can see it nice and easy. Need a little more range there. There we go.
So notice before, this matched up with our ignition,
Right.
didn't it? Our dwell time.
Right. We're actually seeing two current events. This is another caution I want you guys to consider. You can go anywhere in the circuit to get your current.
Correct.
I don't like to work any harder than I have to. So the very first place I'm going is the fuse box. And that's where we are. We have a fuse jumper wire in place of the fuse that feeds the ignition coils. And that's allowing us to see the ignition coil demand. It also feeds the injectors. So I wonder what would happen if I swapped out the primary for the injector and see where that shows up. So let me go make that shift real quick.
So he's going to switch the primary wire that was on the primary ignition, and he's going to go to the negative side. There's two wires that go to the fuel injector. One is going to be the 12 volt or 14 plus volt side, and the other is the computer ground side. That's what he's on. Excuse me. As he puts that channel on, you're going to see something happen right about here.
Let's see if we can.
Going to move that trigger. And if you notice something right here, as voltage goes down, here's our fuel injector pattern, on time from here to here. But what do you notice here on the purple line? As voltage went down, amperage started going up. Now, you may go, well, I don't see what I call a pintle hump. Well, I can kind of see it there. And I'm sure if we blow it up, you'll really see it pronounced somewhere about 60-ish percentage.
Yep. And we'll show you that a little bit more on the screen here when we start talking about the injectors per se. But all I really want to share with you here is, first, back to the second or the primary ignition that we were looking at, as G pointed out, if you really want to know more about how to analyze those, there's a lot of information in that pattern, a lot more than we can cover tonight. Mac Vandenbrink on the TST YouTube channel and Jim Morton.
Jim Morton, yes.
On the TST YouTube channel, both do excellent jobs of explaining how to analyze that ignition waveform.
No doubt.
Okay. If you go ahead and shut that off.
Yep, let's kill it.
The other thing I want to point out while G is taking care of the truck is that, again, you're seeing that we have those two current events, but that's because we're attached to a fuse that's feeding both. If you know that, then it's not an issue. I know that this current pattern goes with the injector I'm concerned about, okay? And that's all fine, and I can focus on that. The other thing I want to point about the use of current is that because of where I'm at, I'm looking at all the coils, all the injectors. So if I suspect I have a problem with one dropping out for whatever reason, I can bring that in.
Bring it in.
And I can look at all of them at the same time. I can leave a firing event or I can leave the injector vent just as a reference to tell me where I'm at. And then I can just monitor it. I can watch it. And once I see one go away and come back and go away, now I know, okay, there is where I have to focus my problem.
Correct.
Okay? And we're still only using 2 channels of our scope.
Exactly. Yep.
Right.
Nice and easy to do.
All right, so we'll step back over here. Another thing I want to point out, this is true of any device that uses a coil for its operation, the ignition coil, the fuel injector, an evap purge solenoid. a transmission solenoid. All of them they rely on that magnetic field to build up and collapse to operate properly. A key to that is how quickly does the driver in the ECU turn that on and off. And that's what we're looking at here. This is the same current pattern, a similar current pattern that we just looked at, but we're blowing up, taking the power of that scope, taking the power of that tool to see just how long does it take to turn that driver off, and we can measure it. And if we see anything more than 100 microseconds, and that's no time at all, then that could point to a bad driver or a weak driver in the ECU. And that could explain why you have a weak or no spark condition or intermittent spark condition, because if you can't turn it off cleanly, the magnetic field's not going to collapse like it should, and the energy generated in the secondary is not going to be where it should. But this applies, again, to the solenoids that aren't closing when they should,
Right.
Like in a transmission. Guys, I mean, how many of you guys are sending out transmission work that you don't have to? If you can go in and verify that electrically everything is fine, which you can do with the scope very easily, current probe and some voltage readings.
Yeah, you can definitely
You can keep a
diagnose it.
lot of that stuff in-house, all right? Fuel injectors, we got the capture. We'll look at the voltage first, again, just as G was talking about. If we look at this from a voltage drop standpoint, we're coming in with source voltage, whatever system charging voltage is, that should be what we see here. The ECU pulls it to ground. Again, we talked about this. We know that this is being grounded through the ECU. There's a floating ground, and we want to make sure that we can check that to see if that's being pulled down correctly. Is it clean? Is it being turned on clean? Is it cutting off clean? That's the flyback voltage that we were talking about, just like we saw in the ignition primary, and for the same reason.
And we shut something off, we're going to spike something.
Right, and we want to make sure that that doesn't get back to the ECU.
Yeah, look
That
at
would
this.
be bad.
This one here is about 80 some odd volts.
Yeah, that's a lot of voltage there. But then what we're saying here is just when that field collapses and the spring is starting to pull that pintle shut, well, now we have a rod of metal moving through that coil of wire, and that's going to create its own little magnetic field and its own little voltage potential. That's what you're seeing right there. That's what G was referring to. That's the pintle hump. You can see that. You can usually see the opening and closing. Closing usually better on the voltage pattern.
Right.
Opening better on the current pattern, but with some scopes you can see them both in either one. But here, very clear, we can see that that's happening. Where's that going to come into play for you though? If you don't see it, maybe
You got
that's
something
stuck.
clogged, it's stuck.
Maybe it's stuck and it's not operating mechanically. It can be fine electrically, but not operate mechanically. Or if you have an intermittent problem, again, if you watch this and you see that bump moving up and down, come and go, you know you have a mechanical issue with that injector. Same with the opening side. You can look at it there too.
You know, one other thing I want to mention here. Again, this is signature of a fuel injector, meaning we see the high voltage going down and so on. Not every injector is going to look the same. Some of these may get pulled down to ground and then float up like this. They may be on an angle. Depends on the manufacturer. So again, that's why it's good to build our library.
Right.
Never mind if you get into GDI, it won't look anything like this. Okay, because that's a different ballgame.
Right. Well, some GDI injectors are still conventionally driven, right? As Chris pointed out at your big event.
Yep.
But there are the newer ones that are piezoelectric.
Piezoelectric.
You're going to get a pattern from that, but it's going to be totally different because of the way they operate, right? All right. Now we're just adding the current. You can see the pintle opening very clearly in this particular current pattern. Okay.
Yeah, you get to
Clean
see this
shut off.
right there.
Yeah.
Really nice. And again, voltage goes down, amperage starts building up, gets to a peak.
Yep.
And you know, these usually pull somewhere about 900 to 1.2 amps or 1200 milliamps. So you don't really pull more than that unless you got a problem.
Yep.
And you're going to pull a computer driver out.
Now, how can I find out? If I go to my service information, they love talking about static resistance tests. Right?
Love it.
So I can go look up the resistance figure for that injector.
And do Ohm's
I can do
law.
an Ohm's law calculation, and I should know what type of current to expect. But again, and I think it's worth going to take a look at. I'm just going to ask you to run this one more time. And all we're going to do is we're going to keep the current up. And remember, we're on. Right. Let's see, we're not going to, I'll just do none for ease. All right, you can shut it off.
Off we go.
Way back to where we started off. Time and voltage. All I did was I went from that 2 milliseconds per division to 500 milliseconds per division.
Picket fence.
Okay, I got the picket fence in there. Let's see if we can. I'm not going to rerun it again by just in time. We're just going to kind of cheat here, and we're just going to use some of the zoom function of the scope to open that up. Let's open it up a little bit more. And what I want you to notice here, yes, I know that I'm on the fuse that feeds both the ignition coils and the fuel injectors, which is why I'm seeing the high ones are for the ignition, the small ones right behind it, that's the injector or the injectors. But what I'm looking at is I'm looking at all of them now.
Right.
And I can monitor this, right? I can see, is it uniform? Is anything higher or lower than the others, which would indicate an electrical problem? Why? Because current's going to directly relate to voltage and resistance, right? If I know the voltage is constant, something going to change in resistance. If I got a bad ground, if I got something going on in that circuit, maybe it's something in the component, whatever the case might be, that's going to be that really quick flag that says, hey, that's not right.
Right.
That stands out. Okay.
Very good.
Any other questions? Any questions so far? Any more?
Actually, I was about to answer this here, but the question was, how did you connect to the fuse? Maybe zoom in
Okay,
with the camera on it.
We have that done with a little fuse, but I want to show these because these are actually, oh, you don't have to bring all that around. Oh, you want to see that? Okay. This is actually a kit that G has. I'm not sure exactly where he gets it from, but it's kind of similar to the Tesla kit where we have terminal ends that we can select from that will match the pins. These are really teeny micro fuses. And then attach a
fuse.
inline fuse. So we're still protecting the circuit, but now we have a loop that we can place our amp clamp around. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a Mac kit or whatever. I have so many different kits. But AES Wave sells them. What you have in your hand.
We'll show you what we got in my hand here. Very happy with what we call the fuse buddies. And you can see we have different ones. This is for the J-case fuses. We just remove the fuse, insert this, and we insert the fuse we took out
right in there. Yep, that
still
works.
Protected. And then, of course, we got the big Maxi super fuse.
That's the big puller.
You know, and then so they're available in different sizes.
Yeah, we have some of those
so that you can insert
as well.
these, right? And they're just fuse buddies. And then you just, like I said, whatever fuse you remove, you just stick it in there, and you're still protecting the circuit. And then you wrap your amp clamp around that, and you're all good to go. So
good. Any other questions, Pierre?
No.
All right.
If you don't have one, and you're the lucky winner of the Tesla kit,
then you can make
one.
That's right.
You just need the fuse, right? The inline fuse holder.
Or again, go to aeswave.com and check it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, the folks there, they come up with all kinds of good
Yeah,
stuff.
George and Carlos have good stuff.
All right. Number 9. Not going to perform this test today. I think that I'm willing to bet that most everybody's watching is familiar with the concept of the fuel pump current ramp. Again, if not, boy, I got a ton of information on it.
6 bar, 8 bar.
It's in your handout. But I wanted to stress here with this is not just fuel pumps, but electric motors in general. Just like the starter motor, current is going to be impacted not only by the electrical condition, but the work that we're asking that motor to perform.
Correct.
Where does this come into play? If I have a fuel pump that's pumping air, then there's no resistance internally in the pump, is there? So is it going to take a lot of current to make that pump spin?
Hey, no.
No, very little. I'll see that here. If I have a restriction, like
Clogged
a fuel
filter.
filter that's clogged, I'll see that current higher than normal because the pump's working harder. And now so many filters are in that module in the tank. And some have more than one,
Yeah.
right?
And they can get clogged up,
And they can
especially when
get
people
clogged
run
up.
low.
All right. What is number 10? What is the top 10 test? It's the test that you come up with. It's the use of your own imagination, applying the scope and what you've learned. All kinds of things come into mind. Scopes are great, for example, for if-then kind of testing. If you see this signal being sent by the ECM, do you see the control unit component coming on the way it's supposed to? That's just one example. Share a real quick story for you. I had a Chrysler product, secondary air injection, which they don't have in the federal states. This was a California car that ended up in Florida. And it was setting codes for a restriction. I used the scope to look at the blower motor and the sensor that was used to feedback so I could see what was going on. Long story short, it helped me find a restriction on the in the ports in the engine. And you know why I had a restriction in the ports in the engine? Because there were no ports in the engine. Someone had replaced the head with a federal head that didn't have the passageways built in.
Well, that'll give you a problem.
So, and the other nice thing that I think we've hopefully shown you tonight is that there's so many tests that you can perform that required very little invasive treatment. We didn't have to pull things apart. We didn't have to take toolbox
and not a lot of gadgets.
Right.
Leads
not a lot of gadgets.
and an AM clamp you should really get.
Yeah.
Again, if you own a Pico kit, they come with them. So.
Yeah, well, I'm sure a lot of us have it. You have it, with your meter. But anyway, if there are no other questions.
And again, you're going to make, give yourself some time and patience working with a scope. Like anything, practice makes perfect. Review the video. There's other videos on the Motor 8 channel, on the TST channel, on other channels that are out there. Review it. Go over it. Go over the handout. And start using it. Make it part of your daily routine.
Yep.
Now, I know some of you, the boss has you doing a timing chain or tires or brakes or whatever, but maybe at lunchtime or break time, take a few minutes and you will get good at this.
Right.
This is the future. So everything out there is electronic now, right? Now, tomorrow I do a hybrid class and we'll be using the lab scope to check the motor windings, to check some other functions on a hybrid vehicle or electric vehicle. So you could go, as he has here, you could fly and think up a million different things to deal with.
I think a lot of the stuff that we've talked about in terms of testing techniques, the fuel pump current pattern comes to mind. It's been around for 20 plus years. I guess when guys first started playing with the old fluke meters and stuff.
Yeah.
But somebody, somewhere, asked themselves, what would happen if? And that test was born. And today, even modern day now, in-cylinder pressure testing, pressure waveform analysis. Somebody created the map sensor for the very first time, like you just shared. And then it got around the circle. We all shared that information with one another. Next thing you know, I had one in my toolbox.
Yeah.
Right?
I built that years back. I also had the PV500. They don't make that anymore.
Right.
PV350, I believe, is the little one that Fluke made as a pressure transducer. But we first got introduced to them on the big box scopes, right?
Right.
If you guys had that, you went, what the hell is this thing? You put this contraption to the boom, and it was a pressure transducer going on your fuel rail. And by the way, doesn't Ford Motor Company and Jaguar and Land Rover, don't they use a pressure transducer rather than a pressure regulator? And some of their software, like the Teradyne software, gives us actual, each fuel injector, the fuel volume on each one, what it could drop. You could do that if you really think about it with a pressure transducer.
Yeah.
And then signal off of number one ignition, so you have the fire in order, or anywhere, and if it's 1, 3, 4, 2, and you pick number 4, then it's going to go 2, 1, 3. You can figure it out. It's not all that hard.
So now that we got this part done, if there are no further questions, it's time to pick a winner.
Oh, the winner.
And if you've been in past webinars, you've known that we used to have the box. We had raffle tickets and stuff.
Too many people.
So many of you guys signed up for this webcast. That's too much. So we're going high tech. So let me go grab the high tech device.
High tech, all electronic. So the high tech device is going to be an app.
There's an app for everything, right? An app for everything. So just so we're all up and above board here. We've already been making sure this works okay. This is a random number generator, and its parameters are set to the number of people who registered for tonight's webcast. So entirely random, have nothing to do with it. We'll push the magic button. Number 314 is our winner. Who is number 314? I'll tell you. Give me 1 second.
314.
Pull up that big old spreadsheet.
So he's
Pop in
going to
314.
look on the spreadsheet of everyone that signed up. I believe we had over 1,200 people sign up on this. So we'll see who 314 is.
And our winner is
Dun, 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 dun. The winner.
Edward Davis from Skokie, Illinois. We will be sending an email out to you probably tomorrow morning, letting you know that you're the winner. And Pico will drop ship you directly your premium lead kit. I think we highlighted
By
that.
Pico.
We'll
Is
show
he
that
online?
next
If you're online, let us know.
Yeah, if you're online, tell us about it.
So look at that.
But you get that.
I'm jealous. That's a
Okay.
great kit.
So
All right.
So
Well, once again, we knocked another one out.
we did, and I want to thank everybody who took the time to watch tonight with us, came to the live event. Thank you very much for doing so. I know it can be tough on a weeknight to come out and do things like this. I hope you found it worth your time, and I hope that you'll join us again in August when we get
I was just
together
going to say
again.
that. And we have an ATIS one coming up.
Coming up with ATIS. In fact, we have we're going to have someone who is right front line, Mr. John Anello. He's probably the first mobile tech,
He's the man
Right.
out there
and he's in this
for years.
butt deep.
He
right
is.
now
He's
with
really
ATIS.
doing a bunch of this.
But he's going to provide us his perspective as a guy who's actually doing this every single day out in the field to give us some of his ideas and what you can expect when you're having to deal with the systems in your shop. So until then,
Good night.
good night.